2 months ago, the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth made the military's annual flu shot optional, ending a vaccine requirement that had existed since 1945. This month, several recruits are in the hospital with influenza, and one recruit is dead. However, the cause of death is still under investigation. It may not be influenza. In any event, all three services are scrambling to put the flu shot requirement back. This is what happened, and the part that matters most for you, which is what the evidence says about whether the seasonal flu shot is worth it. Let's talk about the unfortunate story first. In June, a flu outbreak tore through Joint Base San Antonio-Lackland in Texas, the Air Force's main basic training hub. By late June, the base had logged 275 cases, up from 159 just 1 week earlier. 4 recruits had been hospitalized. 1 recruit had died. Like I said, that cause is still under investigation. It's not been confirmed whether that was flu-related. The hospitalizations, though, those are flu-related. Now, when the outbreak started, the Air Force admitted that only about 40% of its trainees had gotten the flu shot this year. Under the old requirement, when it was required, that number was essentially 100%. When they cut the requirement, vaccination collapsed by more than half. Then, the very predictable thing happened. Now the Army, Navy, and Air Force have each carved out exceptions to the brand new optional policy, and they're once again requiring flu shots for recruits. Turns out, infectious disease is a threat to military readiness and training, even among otherwise healthy service members. The most telling detail is that weeks before the outbreak, the Air Force had reportedly already asked to bring back the requirement. They saw this coming. And to be candid, who didn't see this coming, aside from Pete Hegseth and maybe RFK Jr.? You don't need a PhD in immunology to predict what happens when you get rid of a vaccine requirement right before packing thousands of young people into shared barracks, shared mess halls, and shared air. That kind of setup is one of the most efficient respiratory virus incubators. The flu shot requirement had existed since the Second World War for a reason. That reason didn't change this April. The science didn't change. Influenza certainly didn't change. The politics did. A decision got made purely on ideology while waving away the evidence, and the influenza virus did exactly what the evidence said it would do. This reinstatement 2 months later is about the closest thing that public health will ever get to an apology. Now, all that said, there is one line I will not cross, and it's part of the whole process of thinking like a scientist. I cannot tell you that the flu shot would have saved any specific person from symptomatic disease or kept any specific person out of a hospital bed. Nobody can know the so-called counterfactual for a single person. But that's not how you judge a decision like this. You judge it by what it does to the odds, to the risk, across thousands of people. And on that question, the evidence is very clear. So I'm going to give you the actual numbers, because if you have been on the fence about the seasonal flu shot, like many people are, wondering whether it's worth the bother, whether the benefits outweigh the risks, this next part is for you. I'm going to walk through the evidence for 3 different groups of people, and I'm going to give you not just the benefits, but the risks just as carefully as the benefits. First, healthy adults, including the recruits, possibly including you. The flu shot is not a force field, and how well it works kind of swings around from year to year depending on how well that season's chosen vaccine strains match the strains that actually end up going around. Now, in a typical year, it lowers your chances of getting sick with the flu by about 40 to 60%. That's pretty good, that's helpful. It's not exceptional as far as vaccines go. But getting sick with the flu, really, that's not the number that matters the most, at least to me. The number that matters the most to me is whether you end up in a hospital bed with the flu, like that handful of recruits. And there, a large meta-analysis of test-negative studies found that across adults, flu vaccination cut the risk of being hospitalized with influenza by about 41%. Now think about the news story. These were young, fit, medically screened adults, exactly the group of people you would be most tempted to say, well, they're healthy, they don't need it. But as ICU doctors will tell you, otherwise healthy adults land in the ICU with the flu every single season. So the shot, it doesn't make you invincible. But what it does do is meaningfully reduce your risk of severe disease. What about pregnant women? Now, pregnancy is where the math tilts the most toward getting the shot. And that seems counterintuitive at first, but there's 2 key reasons. The first one is that pregnancy makes the flu itself more dangerous. The normal changes that happen to your immune system and to your heart and to your lungs during pregnancy, what they mean is that a case of the flu is markedly more likely to put you in the hospital than if you were not pregnant. And that's true even in an uncomplicated pregnancy, just due to the biology of what happens during pregnancy. Second, and most people don't know this part, getting vaccinated while pregnant actually protects the baby after birth. A newborn can't get a flu shot until 6 months of age, which leaves them exposed, of course, during the most fragile stretch of their life. But it turns out the mother's antibodies can cross through the placenta into the baby's blood, and it can help protect them through part of that gap. In one randomized controlled trial, vaccinating mothers during pregnancy reduced lab-confirmed flu in the infants by 63% over the first 6 months, and later studies have also found drops in infant flu hospitalizations and emergency department visits too. Then comes the safety question, the one that understandably weighs on expecting parents the most. We gotta slow down for this one because just saying, trust me, it's safe, that's not good enough, especially in pregnant women. And you're not here for me to tell you the flu vaccine is safe and effective without just giving you the details. So let's start with the right comparison and really the right mindset for how researchers think about analyzing vaccine risks. Something like miscarriage, for example, is relatively common on its own, even without vaccines. Somewhere around 10 to 15% of recognized pregnancies end in miscarriage. About 1 in 8 in the largest modern cohort of more than 400,000 pregnancies. Of course, there's large differences in that rate depending on maternal age. When you count the very early losses too, the ones detectable only by hormone testing, it's closer to 31%. Now that baseline risk, that's the number that any vaccine has to be measured against. Because in a population of millions of vaccinated pregnant women, a very large number of miscarriages will occur, no matter what, purely by chance. And that's where a lot of vaccine misinformation stems from failing to properly account for the background rate of the adverse outcome that you're interested in. The job of a safety study, a well-executed safety study, is to figure out whether the vaccinated group has more than what that baseline risk was. The fuller answer for how this works involves a real scientific back and forth, and it's more reassuring than just a flat, it's safe, don't worry about it, because you get to kind of see how the system works in real time. Back in 2017, a vaccine safety data link study reported an apparently worrisome signal. In a small subgroup of women vaccinated with an H1N1 containing shot in 2 consecutive seasons, the odds of miscarriage in the 28 days after vaccination appeared to be elevated, with an adjusted odds ratio of 7.7. But that was a shaky estimate. The confidence interval ran from about 2 to about 27, which is kind of statistics speak for saying this estimate came from very few women. The exact number could be very far off. Further, the analysis was done after the fact. It wasn't pre-specified. So the authors said this themselves. They said the study does not and cannot establish a causal relationship. This was a hypothesis. This was an early signal. It was not a verdict about the safety. And this is how safety systems work. If you identify a possible safety signal through these types of post hoc analyses, you can then go ahead and you can do a higher quality study to figure out if it was a real risk, which is exactly what they did. Then they went on to test that hypothesis properly. The same investigators, they ran a larger follow-up study across 3 more flu seasons, specifically to re-examine that exact same subgroup, and the signal vanished. If you just look at the title of the resulting report, as vaccine misinformation screenshots often do, it sounds a little bit concerning. But that title is meant to convey the topic of what they were studying, not the conclusion. And that titling practice needs to change. Because what they actually found in that larger, higher quality study was no association between the flu vaccine and miscarriage, even among the exact subgroup of women they found this signal in before, the women who were vaccinated the season prior. In that larger, higher quality study, the odds ratio dropped to 0.9. Now, this was in agreement with the broader literature. A meta-analysis pooling multiple studies found no association between flu vaccination and miscarriage, with a relative risk of 0.91. And every large cohort reported to date, from Denmark to the United States and others, has indicated that flu vaccines do not increase risk of miscarriage at all above the baseline rate. This is what rigorous safety monitoring looks like in practice. They do the monitoring, a signal potentially appears, then it gets thoroughly investigated with a better quality study, and they see if that initial signal holds up. Nobody buried the finding or waved it away. It got tested in public by the same people who initially raised the safety alarm. Now, if you widen back the lens to the baby, researchers have gone looking for the specific outcomes that parents fear, And they've not only failed to find harm, sometimes they've actually found the opposite, benefits. Across a meta-analysis of 15 studies and several national registries, including first trimester specific and sibling controlled analyses, maternal flu vaccination shows no increase in birth defects. Stillbirth is not increased, it is actually possibly reduced. One large meta-analysis found an odds ratio of 0.84. A different Australian study found a 51% lower rate. Preterm birth and low birth weight are also not raised after vaccination. Some of those apparent benefits to the baby, they start to shrink once you account for the fact that women who choose to get vaccinated also tend to be healthier and do other healthy practices in general, see the doctor more and so on. That's a bias that researchers call the healthy vaccinee effect. But my point is that the direction that matters for safety here is very clear across millions of pregnancies. The flu shot does not raise the risk of miscarriage, stillbirth, premature birth, or birth defects. And here's the key fact that pregnant women need to know. It is the flu infection itself, particularly like getting a high fever during early pregnancy during the flu infection, that has been linked to birth defects. The vaccine has not. So whereas the shot is not associated with harm, an actual flu infection is. Now on to children. Parents often assume that their child is sturdy enough to ride out the flu. In the great majority of the time, that is totally true. But most of the time, or even a great majority of the time, is not the same thing as always. And the worst case for a child with the flu is not a few extra sick days feeling bad in bed. It's going to the pediatric ICU. Sometimes it's a funeral. Most children who are hospitalized and who die of flu each year were not vaccinated before. A good number here comes from a study in pediatrics that tracked flu deaths in children across 4 seasons. Flu vaccination was associated with a 65% lower relative risk of a child dying from flu, from the paper directly. From July 2010 through July 2014, 358 laboratory-confirmed influenza-associated pediatric deaths were reported among children ages 6 months through 17 years. Vaccination status was determined for 291 deaths. Overall vaccine effectiveness against death was 65%, with the 95% confidence interval going from 54 to 74%. Notice that data tells you 2 things actually. Not only does it say there was a 65% relative risk reduction for death in children, but it also tells you that hundreds of children died from flu from 2010 through 2014. Now that's not common, given how many children there are in the country. But why accept that risk? Now, anecdotally, our daughter is 2 years old. My wife is board certified in pediatrics. Our daughter got the flu shot last year. She's going to get again this year, as will we. Now, for the other side of the ledger, on the risks, it would be a mistake to focus only on the benefits of flu vaccines. Actual evidence-based recommendations come from carefully weighing the benefits against the risks. So now we got to talk about the risk side. The common stuff is minor, it's brief, it's what you're not really worried about probably. A sore arm for a day or two, sometimes a low-grade ache, or some tiredness while your immune system is doing its work and its inflammatory response. That feeling is your immune response. It's not an infection. The injected flu vaccine contains no live virus, so it cannot give you the flu. If you feel run down for a day or two, that's your immune system kind of practicing. It's not the flu infection itself. The rare serious thing that people worry about is called Guillain-Barré syndrome, a usually temporary form of paralysis. Now the data are inconsistent across seasons, but loosely estimate that risk at roughly 1 to 2 extra cases per million flu vaccine doses. And here's the nuance that matters though. You're much more likely to get Guillain-Barré from the flu infection itself from the flu shot. A large self-controlled study in the Lancet Infectious Diseases found about 1 case of Guillain-Barré per million flu vaccinations versus about 17 cases per million flu infections. So by reducing the risk of flu, even if it's only by 50% or something for the vaccine effectiveness, the vaccine very likely prevents more cases of Guillain-Barré than it could ever cause. Now it's helpful to think about what researchers have gone looking for and have never found. When a vaccine goes into tens of millions of arms per year, you don't get to simply hope that it's safe, right? You go hunting for harm in detail and over the course of decades every year. Here's what that hunting has and has not turned up. On death, active safety surveillance has never found a death signal from the flu shot. When US monitors reviewed the death reports that came in after roughly 82 million doses of the 2009 H1N1 vaccine, serious events including death were more rare than 2 per million doses. And then they go and they do a case-by-case review. What they concluded was there was no pattern at all suggesting the vaccine caused those deaths. Most of those who died unfortunately had serious other pre-existing conditions. Autism. The single largest study on this question followed nearly 197,000 children and found no association between getting a flu shot in pregnancy and a child's risk of autism. There is one wrinkle, though, we should talk about, which is that upon their initial analysis, a first trimester subgroup showed a slightly elevated signal for future autism risk. But it stopped being statistically significant after they corrected, it's called for multiple comparisons, for the bunch of different comparisons that they had run. What they concluded was that the initially apparent signal, before they made those corrections, was due to statistical chance. And so there was no recommended change to vaccine policy. Now, anti-vaccine sites often quote the raw numbers from a study like this without doing the statistical adjustments for multiple comparisons. That's not how statistics work, though. There's a reason why they do those adjustments to account for the possibility of random chance. And here's the part that should raise your trust, not lower it. The system does catch real harms when they exist, even when they're rare. A good example is in 2010, surveillance in Finland and Sweden caught something kind of alarming. A specific pandemic flu vaccine called Pandemrix, which was used across Europe, was causing narcolepsy in children and teenagers. That signal was real, it was causal. Vaccinated children had an excess occurrence of about 1 case per 16,000 kids vaccinated. Two things about that, though. First, that vaccine was never licensed or used in the United States. It's not the seasonal flu shot that you're offered at the pharmacy. Second, and this is much more important, the system worked exactly as it should. The surveillance caught the signal within months, even when it was only happening in about 1 in 16,000 children. And then the vaccine was pulled from use in young people. So when someone tells you they never actually check for safety issues, this is your answer. They do check. They have found real problems before, including pretty rare problems. If they can catch a risk, a 1 in 16,000 risk of narcolepsy in kids, or let alone a 1 in a million additional risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome, they could certainly catch all of the various scary claims that you hear around the internet as being common covered up risks, and so on. The closest thing to a routine real risk is small and it's manageable. Giving a young child the flu shot on the same day as the pneumococcal vaccine very slightly raises the risk of a febrile seizure by about 3 per 10,000 children. Now, febrile seizures are terrifying to witness. They don't leave lasting damage, though. And the CDC still recommends the same visit schedule because immunizing kids while they're already in the clinic, it prevents more disease, it prevents more long-term harm than that small risk causes. So the ledger is lopsided on the side of a net benefit. And not by a little. It's pretty clear that the benefits outweigh the risks. On the one side, you get a sore arm, an extra 1 or 2 per million risk of Guillain-Barré, something that the flu infection itself is far more likely to trigger, and a short list of rare effects that decades of hunting have either ruled out as being causally linked to the flu shot or pinned to different vaccines than the ones that are actually seasonally administered in the United States. On the other side, you get about 40% fewer flu hospitalizations in healthy adults. You get a baby that gets protected through the months it cannot protect itself, and a child's odds of dying from the flu are cut by nearly 2/3. The recruits at Lackland are what that personal choice looks like at a national scale. An ideological policy decided the shot was not worth requiring. Vaccination fell from 100% to 40%, and directly as a result, American service members ended up in hospital beds. You get to make the same call for yourself, with the advantage of you can make it with the evidence in front of you instead of slogans and political ideology. I know which side of that ledger I am on. I will be rolling up my sleeve again this year, just the same as every year. You should talk about any questions that you have remaining about yourself and your own particular health circumstance with your doctor. They're the only ones who can help you make this decision for you.